All right, folks. Thanks for joining me today for new quizzes, new questions. I'm going to stray a little bit from the previously advertised agenda because Canvas did send out some information about the status of new quizzes and the features that they are still working on that affects our forced migration, which is no longer a forced migration. So, yeah. So very quickly, why is that not? There we go. So talk a little bit about that new quizzes timeline. Then I am going to talk about an actual feature comparison between classic and new quizzes, since now technically you don't have to choose to move to new quizzes. You can use both formats. So you might ask yourself, what's the difference and which one should I pick? And then we will look at new quizzes, the new question types that it has, a little bit about the settings and moderation options, and then how Lockdown Browser works with new quizzes, because it does work, but it's a little different than classic quizzes if that's what you're used to using. So the updated timeline piece is basically that there is no timeline. Oh, come on in. Yes. Canvas sent this out. This is sort of the meat and potatoes of a much longer email they sent us. But essentially what they said was we got a bunch of feedback, and a lot of it was people were very unhappy that certain features that classic quizzes has are not available in new quizzes. So essentially they're removing any sort of migration deadline. We are currently working with the assumption that there will be 2 quiz engines potentially indefinitely. It really just depends on at what point they can get all of the desired features that classic quizzes has translated to the platform. And it really depends on the kind of testing that you do in terms of security, how you want to give feedback back to students, the kinds of questions you need in your exams, and your grading process. Because if you are strictly a my quizzes grade themselves type of a person, new quizzes is great for you, because it has things like being able to print blank quizzes or moderate student time, test taking times all in one place. But if you're a person who has a lot of manually scored questions, classic quizzes is probably best for you because it has grade by question and new quizzes does not. So this was their spiel. There is no longer a required deadline for migrating to new quizzes. So in a previous announcement, we had said, you need to start thinking about this and be ready to do it by next fall. Well, now you don't have to. So that's the meat and potatoes of what they put out. Here's a very simple comparison of the main features that people like about each platform. So maybe help you decide which one would be the best one for you to use. And the grade by question is huge for a lot of people. If you have a lot of manually scored questions, like essay questions, short answer questions, that grade by question piece allows you to navigate to that question, grade the first student, and then when you click next, they're on that same question for the next student. You're grading all of the same essay or whatever at once. New quizzes does not have that currently. Classic quizzes, a popular feature is being able to delay when the students can see their quiz results. So if you have a window where students can take the exam anywhere between Monday and Friday, well, Susie takes it on Monday, gets her results right away, and then tells Marlo, hey, here's what I got. And then Marlo goes in on Wednesday and takes the test and gets a significantly better grade. So the delay of release means you can wait until after the final day to take an exam for students to be able to see their results. New quizzes does not have that. You have to, essentially it does, but it's manual. You have to go in, turn things off, turn things on. It's not automated like it is with classic. Another one is being able to add text to a quiz without actually having a question tied to it. So classic quizzes has that. There are some perks for new quizzes. If you teach the same class online and face-to-face with new quizzes, you can print blank quizzes out of Canvas. You can also print the answer key and you can print the student responses. So with new quizzes, since you can't play that release sort of thing and students, maybe you don't want them ever to see their results, you could actually print the student's instance of the quiz, and then they could meet with you in your office and you can go through the results. And you, even if you have things shuffled and whatever, you'll still see what student answered for each question. But if you have a classic quiz and you just need to print blank quizzes for an in-class version, you can migrate it to new quizzes, leave it unpublished, and still get those prints. You don't get the responses piece, but you can still sort of utilize that feature for the classic quiz that you migrate over. And you can't migrate the other direction. So if you build it in classic, you're going to always migrate to new, but you can't go the other way. It is super easy to do those test taking accommodations in new quizzes because you set the time modification one time, and that will populate out to all of the quizzes and exams in your class. So if I get time and a half, you go to the first quiz or exam for your class, say, there's Angela, she gets time and a half, and that will go out to anything. So if the quiz is 15 minutes, then I would get, I had to make the math hard. If the quiz is 20 minutes, then I automatically get, I automatically get 30. If it's an exam that's an hour and a half, then I'm going to get time and a half of whatever that hour, whatever the time limit is. So you don't have to go in and do math. You just use the time multiplier one time and it will populate out. So that's pretty cool. And there are some question types in new quizzes that are not available in classic for a little more. Well, they market them as more engaging. You've got drag and drop and ordering and hotspots, and stimulus is a popular one for my ed folks because they like to, they'll put up, I don't know, a piece of poetry and then ask multiple questions related to that, or language arts people. So the stimulus question lets you have a single prompt and attach multiple questions to it. So that's sort of the big features that people go, why doesn't this have this? Those are the big ones that might help you decide what you want, which engine you want to use. Definitely, if you're a grade by question person, stick with classic because that is not an option in new quizzes. Yeah. I mean, you can kind of do it because you can jump to the question, but it's a lot of clicks to then navigate to the next one, and it's just it's a workaround. It's not an actual feature built into it yet. All platforms do have lockdown browser support, so that's not an issue if you need to have test proctoring. They all have the standard default multiple choice, multiple answer, essay, fill in the blank, matching. And I believe new quizzes now does partial credit for, I think it's multiple answer and maybe matching. So some people, if you want for sure to have partial credit, then classic quiz is probably the better way to go. Of course, both platforms, you can have multiple attempts. You can extend test times and do moderating, like additional attempts for just one student. And then they both have varying degrees of analytics. New quizzes and analytics take a little longer to get. It can take up to 24 hours for the analytics to be available. Classic quizzes is much quicker, but they do have analytics built into them. So, and at the end of the day, if you're not sure which one you should use, you can always email me or Carrie and say, this is what my exam has in it. What do you recommend? But for those of you that are joining late, Canvas released an announcement that they are not going to have a cutoff date for classic quizzes now. So you can continue to use full platforms. They will continue to provide technical support and bug fixes for classic and new as they work on developing new quizzes. So that's where we are. All right. Questions at this point about said announcement? Tell your friends, tell your family. Yes.
So I've got a 93 question test that I'd love to load up here, but it's got lots of images and so forth. Can I upload those images?
Yes.
And can I just download a CSV file that has only their answers so I can analyze it in Excel?
I think with that one, you need to be in classic quizzes. I don't remember all the details of what analytics are available, but we can look into it. Yeah, but yes. And with if you have a new quiz and you have it in a Word document, you've created it in a Word document and you've marked the correct answers, we still have access to the Respondus test uploading software. So you can send those files to either me or Carrie, whichever one of us is your person, and we can upload those into Canvas, either as classic or new. But again, if you build it as a new quiz initially, you cannot downgrade it to classic quizzes, but you can always migrate a classic quiz to the new quiz platform.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
So this semester, I wanted to start using the new quizzes, but I found out that, like for chemistry, the math part of the new quizzes does not have most of the features that
Yeah. So that's another one I should probably put on here is that if you do use a lot of the equations and the heavy math stuff, you probably at this point are better to stay in classic until they get that stuff added to new quizzes. Yeah. So
is the plan that they're going to bring all that functionality into new?
we sure hope so. So realistically, my interpretation of what's happening with this tool / product is that, they started building this thing in 2019 and then COVID hit and basically Canvas had to pivot and shift their resources to emergency remote instruction for the last couple of years. So their product development teams and hours really shifted towards that. Now that we're sort of through the worst of that storm, they're refocusing on this tool and collecting all this feedback about what people want. And I wish I should have actually put the whole email in here, but there was an emphasis on focusing on those must-have features like grade by question and delaying the release of the exam result. So our hope is that those are going to come within the next 6 months to a year. The main reason that we were okay with, yes, everyone needs to move by next fall was the idea that those features were going to be in place by then. And like with test bank migration, that's another headache currently with new quizzes. Now that that is not the case, and they've basically told us like, we don't know, we're working on it, but we can't tell you specifically when it will be ready. They're going to continue to support both platforms because they did have a nice way of saying it. Like, we want you to move to this new platform because it's the best solution for what you need versus an arbitrary deadline. So I appreciate that they owned up to their situation and are going to continue to provide both options based on what people need. So, and I think that's kind of why it got derailed for so long and why it's taking so long as COVID hit and had to, focus their resources elsewhere. Now they're circling back. So if you have questions about which platform might be better for you, be sure to reach out and I'm happy to.
So it's like, do they give you a chance to talk to them about these things that are not in there? Like,
Yes.
Can you email them and say, no, can you improve them?
Yeah, there's a new quizzes hub, which I can send Marlo the link for that and she can put it in the CTL stuff. But there is a new quizzes hub, or if you just Google new quizzes hub for Canvas, it should come up. It's part of the Canvas community that we're a part of. There's basically a single place now where they're putting all of the new quizzes related stuff. And that has an area where people are suggesting and saying like, hey, we need this feature. So yes. Yep. And that's, supposedly that's the feedback they've been looking at is feedback from faculty, people who are actually using this tool with their students and saying, come on guys, we have to have grade by question. That's ridiculous. It takes me 12 hours to grade 5 essays because I have many, many clicks to do it. So yeah.
And has your office provided them with feedback, Angela?
Yes. Yep.
Explain to me how the grade by question works.
Well, in classic quizzes, when you have grade by question, it's great. So you tell it, I want to grade question 5 for all of my students. So you jump to question 5, it pulls up the prompt, and then you get to basically shuffle through each student's response to that question. So it's fresh in your brain. You're looking at the essay.
And I've got my rubric that I
Yep.
don't have to be jumping
Yep.
every time I have a new cheat.
Yes, and that's
Yeah.
available in classic.
You should have told me about that 5 years ago.
You didn't come to the training.
You either did.
I mean, I'm hearing it now.
Those things. I know. The quiz functionality thing really is something we should have a workshop on every semester because we get new people and things. But anyway, yeah. So
You forget to tell things.
yeah, just because you didn't come doesn't mean I forgot. But yes, so it allows you to focus on just the one question, and it's a very quick click through to bring up the next student's response, the next student's response, and so on. You can even, I think, set it up to do that, to see the responses anonymously. So as you're grading by question, you don't see the associated student name, just in case we all like to feel like we don't have bias, but sometimes you do. Sometimes you just have that one student where you're like, or on the flip side of that, the sympathy grade, like, oh, I know they're on the cusp of having a B and being in the program, and so I'm just gonna. So that's not an option in new quizzes. So yes,
It seems like new quizzes is actually kind of
downgrade.
worse.
Yeah. I know this is being recorded, so I'll cut this part out. But that's kind of our complaint that we've said to them I've said to them in live things like, it's not really an upgrade an upgrade means I get all the stuff I had before plus
And then
new
more.
stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean here's some new stuff, but we're going to take away all this good stuff that you used to have. Like, that's not an upgrade. That's a side grade. That's we're going to downgrade.
So like now I'm saddened that, I don't know what I'm going to do with these new quizzes. I mean,
Right.
the class quizzes, they're working like perfectly.
Yep. Yeah. So don't change it. Now you don't have to. Like, there will be no forced migration to the new quizzes platform. They acknowledge that it just wasn't ready, and people were angry, and rightfully so, because you can't downgrade the feature set and then make people just deal with it. Not okay. But again, props to Canvas for owning up and realizing they needed to continue supporting both platforms. Side note though, and we'll get into this in a second with how Lockdown Browser works. The students can't tell from the quiz title. Okay, so here you can tell which is a new quiz and which is a classic quiz as the instructor, because classic quizzes will have a white rocket ship and new quizzes will have a green one. But in the student view, there's no distinction. They just see rocket ships. So, and the reason this matters is if you use Lockdown Browser for proctoring, there's a different process for accessing the quiz through the Lockdown Browser for classic versus new. And the testing center, has to kind of wing it and try to figure out which way it is. Or if you're allowing them to use Lockdown Browser at home, they need to kind of know. So if you think about it, not a huge deal because it will still work if you don't. But, putting something like CQ or classic or something, or letting your students know, like, I use classic quizzes, so that they know which process to use for using the Lockdown Browser with it. Because why wouldn't it be the same? That's another thing. Like, why is that different? But it is. I guess we could just talk about that since we're on it. The difference there being, with a classic quiz, the student launches Lockdown Browser first, then they log into Canvas and they go to the quiz and they start it. With a new quiz, the student actually logs into Canvas with their standard browser first, goes to the quiz, launches it, and then they are prompted to launch the Lockdown Browser. A thing pops up that says, you need to launch the Lockdown Browser. They click a button, then the Lockdown Browser launches. So it seems kind of silly and arbitrary, but when they're at the testing center and the testing center doesn't know which format you use, or even if you put in your request, when you're putting in your proctor request, let them know, like, hey, we use classic quizzes, or we use new quizzes, then they know how to launch that. We do have information for your classes about Lockdown Browser if you use classic versus new. So you can email me or Carrie and say, I use new quizzes in my class. Can you send me the information for my students for the Lockdown Browser process? I already have it. Don't reinvent the wheel, and I can send that to you. Okay. If there are no questions at this point, let's look at a new quiz as a student and talk about some of the question types that you have available to you with new quizzes. Oh, that's annoying. I had to complete. Well, I guess we can look at it in teacher view. So let me look at it in preview without. Okay, cool. So there are a couple of different kinds of fill in the blank options. You can do a standard fill in the blank where they're typing in the word and you define the level of error or the words that are acceptable. You can do a drop down fill in the blank. That's what this is. So you provide the options from a drop down. Or they have this one that they call a word bank, where you end up with a word bank underneath the blank, and the student then has to drag and drop the word into the blank to answer the question. So different options for fill in the blank. It's kind of a small screen. This next one is a stimulus question. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we see the stimulus, with information about panda bears. Here's a picture of a panda eating bamboo and some information about pandas. And then each of these questions, going all over the place, is tied to the stimulus. True or false? This panda is eating bamboo. How many pandas are in the image? Obviously. Doing some examples here. And then where do pandas live in the wild? So any type of question that you can build in new quizzes, you can associate with the stimulus. So you're basically just sort of pulling them up and linking them together. We exit the preview really quick. You can also set up the stimulus to go into the options for the stimulus. You can set it up so that the stimulus appears above the questions and then the questions are listed underneath. So questions to the right or questions below. The cool thing about this is if you have your exam set up to deliver one question at a time, no backtracking, what ends up happening is they see the stimulus and then it does just display one question at a time. So it'll put the first one, then when they click next, it leaves the stimulus there and brings the next one up and brings the next one up. If you shuffle your questions, it will shuffle the stimulus amongst all the questions, but of course the questions that are tied to it will stay with it, but they'll get shuffled as well. So I might have a different first stimulus question than Marlo would. So they still stay together. So I when I do one at a time with no backtracking, I like the questions below because it's more screen real estate rather than having them shoved side by side. If I'm delivering all the questions at once, I like the side by side because it's easier to see that these are the questions that are associated with the prompt. That's just my personal preference. You can always play with it. And then we have this in there. This one is an ordering question. So you can basically do a sequence of some kind. And this can be text or images or a combination of text and images. So the prompt is to put the items in the correct order for taking a new quiz. And then they have 6 steps. And then the student would drag and drop the items into the correct order or the sequence. So click submit to turn it in is probably going to be the last step. So on and so forth. So that's an ordering question. This is Hotspot. Click on the image to identify the adorable panda bear. So behind the scenes, what I have done is I've identified the entire panda as the clickable area to get credit for the question. With Hotspot, it's like, well, I guess, no, we're not going to go back. We won't flash the Blackboard. You can only identify one area that is the clickable area for the correct answer. So let's say, identify the eyes of the panda. You would have to have one question for that. Then the next hotspot would be identify the nose of the panda. My brain always goes toward cell biology when I think about this thing. Like if you wanted to have someone identify the different organelles in the cell, you would have to have a question for each one of those as the hotspot. But essentially what happens is I click on the panda to indicate there's the panda, and then I submit it, and I can see whether or not that correctly identifies the key panda. This one is a categorization. Canvas has pandas as their mascot, so that's where my brain goes with us. Pandas, plus they're just cute. Categorization is cool. You can have any number of categories at the top, followed by any number of possible answers down below. So these are those ones that they're like, oh, they're more engaging for students because you get to drag and drop. And you can also have, what are they called? Distractors in your possible answers. This one is kind of tricksy because it is, if I remember right, it's an all or nothing for points. So if anything goes in the wrong category or you put a distractor in there, it's no points for the whole thing, which is kind of a bummer. You can always go back and manually give people credit, but again, that's a pain. Partial credit would be lovely. So this is the good idea, bad idea for test taking tips. That's a good idea. That's a bad idea. That's a good idea. So you get the idea. You have your friend take the test for you.
I think it's odd. It's all or nothing.
Yeah, I don't love that.
Like, why would you want
Yeah.
that?
So that's kind of the downside to this one at this time. Hopefully that's one that they're working
I
on.
don't know if they had like.
Let me double check that just to make sure. We're going to go into. This is the ordering one. Let's see what our options are for ordering. Great. Yeah, see, the ordering one, unless there's an option under options that says allow partial credit, I think the assumption is that it's not. So here's the, we'll look at how to actually build these, but Mr. Panda. Oh, I have to click the pencil to go into edit. Hello. Sorry, people on the screen who are watching me scroll crazily. There's your distractors. Yes, I think it is all or nothing. So yeah, a little bit more limiting when you factor that in, unless again, you're going to go in and manually look at them and adjust. You know, if there are 10 correct matches and they got 9 out of 10, you can't always go back in and manually add points, but it's a lot more work when you have to do it manually. Okay. Oh, let's look at. Let's look at some of the differences in the classic quiz settings versus the new quiz settings. Again, with this idea that now that there's no pressure to move to one or the other, we can talk about why you might pick one or the other. This is a classic quiz, as it says by the title. So you'll of course have options to put in your instructions, whether it's that's another one. With classic quiz engine, you can do a practice quiz, a graded quiz, or surveys. New quizzes you can't do surveys with. They don't have a survey feature. You have your option to shuffle answers. With classic quizzes, in order to shuffle the questions, you do have to put them in a question bank and basically tell it to pick 25 out of 25, and then it will randomize the order. New quizzes does have a single click feature for shuffling. So that's another, I suppose that's another point in the new quizz's favor. Of course, you've got your time limit, multiple attempts, which score to keep. Here's that delayed thing where you can let the students see the correct answers, and then you can control when they see it. So my test closes on Friday. I'm going to let them see the answers on Monday. You can also control how long they get that. So you could literally set a 30-minute window. Like, we're taking this, you get to take it on Friday, and then I will open up a 30-minute window for you to review your answers, and that's it. The longer they have it, the more likely they can. Did you have a question? Or?
Yeah. So that feature with the delay is not available on new quizzes?
Correct. This is a classic quizzes only feature. There is a workaround for new quizzes, but it's not an automated thing. You have to go in, and when you initially launch the quiz, you basically say you can't see your results at all. And then you have to go back in and check additional boxes to then show the results. And if you want it to be a timed thing, you have to then go back in and uncheck those things. So it's there, but it's not there, right? It's there, but it's not convenient. Whereas this is all just built right in. Of course, you've got your one question at a time. Both versions can do one question at a time in the displaying of the questions. Passwords, you can adjust who the quiz is assigned to. So if Marlo needs to take the test early because she's whatever, I can come in here and I can say Marlo has access the day before everybody else does, but only her. That's available in Classic and New. And with our questions themselves, if I want to shuffle all of the questions in a Classic quiz, I have to make a question group, and then I have to drag and drop them all into the group, and then it will shuffle them. So a little more work to shuffle all the questions in a Classic quiz. Have your same options for I haven't done it in so long. No, I don't want to go into edit. I want to. Oh, I love a peep. My mouse is just, it's the mouse, totally. Okay. Or maybe I can't. Why am I having a brain lapse on moderating this thing? It's really annoying. I'm totally like, where's the moderating? That's funny. Oh, it's because my screen is so small. Normally it's on the right-hand side, but because I'm smooshed. That's why I was like, it should be up here in the corner. That's what I'm used to saying. Okay, I'm not crazy. It's just the screen. So, Classic quiz moderation. You can do the same kind of things. You can come in here and give additional time. The only option you have in Classic quizzes, though, is to give the specific amount of extra time, which means you have to configure every single quiz and every single exam separately in the Classic quiz engine, because if the accommodation is time and a half, that's what you have to give. So 10 minutes, it's 15 minutes, etc. The new quizzes engine has a multiplier feature that we'll look at, but you can there. Now I feel, I swear I thought I was going bonkers there for a second. Why is it there? With new quizzes, we have some different settings. So new quizzes is interesting, and another I guess I would say this is a point in its favor. You'll notice that new quizzes has a separate field here for points. This is separate from the point values given to each question. So if you want every one of your quizzes to be worth 25 points, regardless of the number of questions in the quiz, you can do that in new quizzes. You basically tell it, this quiz is worth 25 points. And then when you put the questions in the quiz, it doesn't matter. It doesn't care how many you put in there. It doesn't care what the point values are. And then how the final total is calculated is a percentage of correct. So that's kind of hard to explain, but like if there are 10 questions worth 1 point each and I get all 10 of them correct, I will get all 25 points. If I get half of them correct, I will get half of 25 points. Does that make sense? It just allows you to have them all be the same total points. So if you are weighting your grades or dropping those scores in a set of scores, weighted grades, it's relevant that they're all worth the same amount of points. Otherwise, the weighting, the averaging doesn't make sense. Again, you've got your options to assign it all the same way, giving people extra access or whatever you need to do there. There's the super intuitive build button in order to get to the rest of the quiz. I don't love this, but this is how you actually get to your questions and your settings. You click build. And now you're in your quiz and you can look at the settings. So under settings, we have our global shuffle questions, shuffle answers, one question at a time, with or without backtracking, requiring a password, time limits. Okay, this is another one, good public service announcement. When you're setting your time limits for your exam and you know you have students with accommodations, do not set your base time limit as what those students would get with their accommodations. Meaning, if normally students get an hour and a half, don't make your time limit 3 hours because you know you have someone with double time. Because what that really means is that student, based on how the policy is written, would it then get 6 hours. So this time limit should always be what the standard time limit is for each student. Then we set the accommodations on top of that. And the reason I like to bring this up and point this out is If a student gets double time and your test is really 3 hours long,
Honors, I'm really sorry.
then that's okay.
This office for honors,
No.
you know where it is?
I don't.
No, okay, thank you.
Sorry. The testing center does have to actually schedule a 6-hour window because the student has to be allowed the fully allotted time. So if it really is only an hour and a half, then they only have to get 3 hours. It just makes scheduling more difficult for them if they're like, well, we have to prepare for 6 hours. Here's your multiple attempts with which score to keep. This is a feature that New Quizzes has that Classic does not. Require time between attempts. So if you're giving them 3 attempts and you don't want them to just try to remember what the answers were and go back and take it again, you can put a waiting period between, which is kind of cool. And then here's your student result stuff. So this is where that piece should live that lets me say, don't show up these answers until after the last day to take the test. But the workaround is you're only going to select these top things. So you can show them how many points were awarded, how many points it was possible, and then the prompt and the options. If you want them to see what they responded, whether they got it right or wrong, whether it was showing the actual correct answer, and then the item feedback. This is the part where you have to come back and manually click those after the last day. And then if you don't want them to see it again, you manually have to come back and unclick them. Most people default to just doing this piece, and then if the student wants to see the details, they go and talk to the instructor one-on-one, which again, more time out of your day. Not that you wouldn't love to do it, of course, but again, because of the technology that's imposing time issues on you guys. You're not busy at all though, right? I mean, no, not at all. All right. Here's where you can go to those reports I mentioned, feature analytics, quiz and item analysis, outcome analysis. I don't know what that is mostly, but this guy does. And then moderate. This is the cool piece that I really like about New Quizzes in terms of accommodations. For Benny Bengal, I can pick any quiz in the class. I can come in here to do his accommodations. And if I use the time limit multiplier, let's say he gets double time. Once I save that, that populates out to every quiz and exam in my class, and he gets double time. Do not use give additional time. Because what that will do then is slap on whatever you put in here onto every quiz. Well, if it's a 10-minute quiz, they probably shouldn't get 30 extra minutes of time on it if you have it in your brain that you're doing it for an exam. It is going to populate out to all of them. So you want to use that multiplier. And under moderate, you can do things like give additional attempts. You can also, on the fly, adjust the time. So let's say the testing center calls and, well, we had an emergency and they lost 30 minutes of their test time because something exploded. I can come in here and I can actually, while they're in the middle of taking their test, I can go, boom, you get 30 more minutes. Or you can as well, but usually you're doing your jobs. So they need to call me, which is great. Go team. But yeah, so extra features in there. All right. The thrilling details of quiz settings. Just what you wanted to hear on your lunch break. All right. I guess, would you like me to show you how to build some of these things? Or do you think, they're pretty intuitive, but I can go through it if you want. How to build some? Your game? Okay. Cool. Let's do it. I'm just going to make a new quiz then. When you go to make a new quiz, it is going to prompt you to choose the quiz engine. They do have this nice link here to learn more about the differences. This is that quiz hub thing I was talking about. This is the New Quizzes hub. So if you follow the breadcrumbs back to the main level, then you can find that place to give your feedback. But this has got a comparison sheet on here. So I'm going to do a new quiz. You know you're always going to do classic. You can't tell it to remember. I'm always going to go classic. Then I'm going to go new. You do have to be careful. I don't know why it defaulted to 5 points. Normally it doesn't put anything in here. If you want these numbers to match up, it's always a good idea to go through and tally up your points and then confirm that that same number is in this field, because otherwise it's going to default to whatever's in this field and do that weird percentage calculation. Put it in whatever group you want. This is the points. Don't ever touch this stuff. I don't even think you can. Yeah, you can't mess with that. Another reason this is such a hang up is technically this is an external tool. This new quizzes engine lives outside of Canvas, which is weird. What am I assigning to? I'm good there. I'm gonna build now. I do like that in new quizzes you can add instructions at the top. That's good. Yeah. And everything is clickable for editing. So you can either use the pencil or you can just click right on the text and it will go into edit mode. Sometimes that's annoying because I'm trying to scroll and I'll click on something and I'm in edit mode. I don't want that. And then to add questions, we're just going to use the add content. You can see all the different choices. And I think these are all numeric, and the formula I think are also available in Classic, and as well as file upload. Let's start with stimulus, because that I think is one that is cool and underutilized. So when you build a stimulus question, the first thing you actually do is build the stimulus. You don't have to have a title. And they say, or you do have to have a title. The instructions are optional. I think it looks kind of weird to use the instructions box and then have the content box. I just put my instructions down in the content box right above the content, because then it's otherwise it's this weird. It looks weird. It spaces it out. This is going to be so the content area has the full rich content editor. So the stimulus can be anything. It could be an embedded YouTube video that you want them to watch and answer questions about. It could be a formula, it could be a table, it could be a picture, it could be text and images. You could link out to something else if you aren't using Lockdown Browser. Whatever you want to build in here, it can be. Okay, text about pandas, great. I can go and find a picture if I wanted to. Upload media. Then again, under my options, I'm going to make sure I open up my options field and decide which direction I want the questions to appear, to the right or to the bottom. Let's go with below. Item banking, you can add this question to a bank, and then you're just going to click done. So that's just the building the prompt. Then we have this little attach question thing. You'll click that. You can build a stimulus in an existing exam and then basically drag and drop the questions to attach them, or you can build new ones. So if, like in the Blackboard days, if you wanted to refer back to the same thing, you basically had to copy paste it into every single question. In this case, you don't have to do that. So let's say I have a true false question about pandas I want to add. You can see it's pushed off to the side, so it's associated with this stimulus. So, pandas are now true or false? Yes. And then within these questions, you have all your standard options. So if this was a multiple answer, I could say partial credit or not. I can also change how many points this is worth. So, and these little speech bubbles, if you're not aware, if you've never been in here, this is where you can do your feedback. So feedback for a correct answer. Great job. Feedback for an incorrect answer. You got it wrong. And then general feedback, regardless. Direct them to info about pandas in the textbook on page 34. And when you put feedback in, those little bubbles turn dark so that you know you put feedback on there. So if you need to revisit it, sorry, let's scroll to get on weird. And you can go back and edit your feedback. Oh, again, the clickability sometimes is annoying. So you would then just go through and attach and build as many questions as you wanted to associate with your text about pandas. When you're ready to move on to the next actual item in the quiz, you're going to use the plus sign down here or above. That's another cool thing about this is Unless you're shuffling and then it doesn't matter. But if there is an order to your madness, this button will make the question appear above the one you're on, and the bottom button will make it appear below the one you're on. Okay, let's do a categorization now. Question title has to do with like searching and stuff. When you do item banks, what you actually want to fill out is the stem. Why they're coming up with topics. Again, this is all, it's got the full text editor, so you can do pictures, video, whatever you want to do. And then by default, you'll have two categories. And for each category, turtle. Whatever you can fill out on that, but and if you need additional categories, that's where you can add your additional categories. And then this is where you can add your distractors. I don't know what rock. It's not gold or one, but it's and your point value again, and your feedback if you want to add it. Categorization questions are pretty easy to set up, and it will show you the right and wrong, and then the distractors. Ordering, pretty straightforward. Add your stem. So this is where you say place the items in order. You can choose to have a top label. So if you want to provide the first step, so it's very clear which, is it a top down list or a bottom up list? So this would be step one. And then, of course, you're going to put them in here in the correct order. And the system will shuffle them when it's delivered to the student. And once again, you've got the full content editor to do pictures. My usual example of this is actually cell, mitosis, when they break apart into two cells. I don't know if I think that's what it is, but I just think it's something you want to do. But you can do literally just pictures, phases of steps and whatnot. You can have as many as you want. So if you need to have more than 4 steps, you just click add answer. And the bottom label is if you want it or not. Last step. You can, and this is where you would turn that off if you don't want those labels. Okay, no, I don't need a top and a bottom label. I'm making points. Feedback. Go. So they're pretty quick to build. Hotspot is the only question we have to fully disclose that is not accessible to screen reader. Right here, it even tells you not accessible to users requiring a keyboard only access. So you would obviously need to be aware of any accommodations your students have, and if they require a keyboard only screen interaction, you would need to have an alternative for this question. Identify the whatever it is. So then you would actually have to have the image or file on your computer already, and you would browse for it. I don't know if there's anything on this computer. Nope, empty. Well, this is where I would pull in my, I can't show you actually. No, I can't actually. Should have brought a picture. And go consult the interwebs and grab a picture of a panda really quick.
Angela,
Yes.
it's Heidi. I don't know if we would talk about this now or later. For my new class, I'm importing test questions and banks from McGraw-Hill.
Okay.
And I tried, because the deadline we were under, I was putting into new quizzes, and I'm having trouble like viewing it. I think it shows up to me as a question bank instead of a quiz.
Quiz, okay. And you said you're using question from McGraw-Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Shoot me an email with the information, and we'll probably have to deal with that, just the two of us.
Yes.
So we'll be able to re-import them as classic quiz format. And then if you do still want to use new quizzes, we can port them over. Some of it depends on how the format that they're provided in.
Yes.
So yeah, we can troubleshoot that and fix it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. So here's my little panda. And then with the hotspot, you have some geometric shape options, or you can use the polygon, which is essentially you click a bunch of times to define a more rounded area. So if my question was going to be, identify the head of the panda. Come around here, and I would very carefully click, click, click repeatedly to select the entire head of the panda. And again, you can only identify one area of clickiness per hotspot question. So there's the area of the panda that is considered a correct answer. And this is anywhere within there gets full credit. So pretty easy to set that up, and there it is. And then if you need to edit the hotspot area, where do you go? You click into it, it basically goes away. Click on his cute little face. There. The only inaccessible question type. All of the other question types are accessible and navigable with keyboard only. That's- The formula ones are kind of, fill in blank. Yeah, the options for fill in the blank. So it's kind of interesting to set this one up. So type a statement and surround the word with backticks to indicate where the student will fill in the answer. So they give you this example of roses are red, violets are blue. And then I was like, where is the backtick? And you'll see once I surround it in backticks, now I have options for what kind of blank I want that to be. It could be open entry, it can be drop down, or it can be that word bank where they got to drag and drop. Yep. And it doesn't matter what you put initially in the backtick, but it's going to pull that as your first choice. Probably not, actually, there might be. So, and it's cool that you can, for each blank, select different things. So it doesn't have to be all drop down. It doesn't have to be all open entry. You can pick which one. So let's say this one I want to be a word bank. Which one is the correct one? And then the word bank will contain all of those for dragging and dropping. Open entry has some options too. You can do close enough. I don't really know the difference between contains and close enough. I guess close enough might be like if I typed C-U-T, I don't know, 2 E's, I'm not really sure. And there's exact match. Specify, these are the answers I will accept, upper and lower case. And then this other expression match. That one is here. So options for multiple fill in the blank situations. I think might only be in the quizzes is formulas. So this one is neat. Essentially, you define a formula and then you can tell it ranges. So if I'm having my students work on, 2-digit addition, I can say what is 5 plus or 15 plus or 10 plus and then X. I would define as all the numbers between 10 and 99, and they will randomly generate a different number for X every time the question is generated in the quiz. So the students get the same concept with different numbers. Keep them from cheating. Or this is a great one for unlimited attempt quizzes, so they can practice the concept over and over by getting different numbers every time they take the quiz. So it's a little wordy, but here's where you tell it the number of solutions, decimal places, and then it will generate all the possible answers. Pretty sure the rest of them are ones that are in quizzes and well. Matching, I think, is a little easier to set up in new quizzes. You have your prompt and your, whatever your question is. The one thing I think that new classic quizzes has over new quizzes with matching is when you need to use the same answer over and over again, the classic interface makes that easier to do. I think with this one, you end up putting, I don't think it's smart enough to recognize if you put the same thing in multiple times and only give them one choice. Because I think the matching interface ends up being, they see the prompt and then they see a drop down of available matches. But you can have more question and answer pairs. We're almost done. Got your distractors. I'll go to vote. Of course, we want to shuffle them. Do partial credit on this one. Nice. 3 items. Let's make it like 2 points. Done. Oh, it is smart enough because I spelled it exactly the same. So,